Hello, and I am delighted to introduce this DHSC Knowledge Drop. I'm Rick Webb, and I work in the Procurement Policy and Capability team alongside Ren Blackwell and Amy Dietrich, who will also be presenting today. We've developed this training alongside ELS, a specialist training organisation working in partnership with DHSC Commercial Directorate. This knowledge drop has been created for those in the health family and will give an introduction to the DHSC Commercial Directorate and provide a high-level overview of important procurement rules. Whether you're just starting your journey in commercial, are in a policy team, an operational role, or an arm's-length body, you have a role to play in helping to deliver value for money for the public good. And today, we'll explain how you can do that. Procurement is a technical subject, and we're here to share our years of experience with you. We do not assume that you'll get all of this right away. If you take anything from today, it's know that we're on hand to help at every step of the way. This knowledge drop will give you a better understanding of the role of the commercial function, key legislation for public sector procurement, achieving value for money, the fundamentals of contracting in DHSC, contract types, typical processes, and some tools used throughout the public procurement lifecycle. So let's take a look at the commercial team. Who are we? What do we do? And how can we help?
The commercial role. The commercial function exists to help you deliver value for money when procuring. We also work to ensure compliance with the legislation, such as the public contracts regulations. We develop documents and guidance which set out a clear direction on how to compliantly procure. The DHSC guidance is available on the internet, and ALBs will have similar documents locally. So, what is commercial? Well, simply put, the commercial function is involved in all activities concerning spending public money. This includes from conception of the business need through to the disposal of goods or the ending of services. We work with stakeholders to find solutions which are cost-effective and deliver value for the public. Okay, and what's procurement? Well, typically procurement projects consist of a cycle of activities, including defining requirements, going to the market, communicating and advertising, selecting suppliers, evaluating bids, awarding contracts, and then managing changes to contracts. Commercial colleagues have a role to play at each of these stages. Alright, so how can you work with commercial to gain the most from us? Well, there are 3 simple principles to consider. The first is simply to involve us. It can never be too early. Secondly, you can provide a pipeline of contract and procurement activity for the next 6 to 24 months. And thirdly, encourage your team to build their commercial awareness. The DHSC Commercial Policy Certificate and the Contract Management Training for Operational Contract Managers are examples of relevant training. But you've also made a good start by attending this knowledge drop.
The legal and procedural context for contracting in DHSC. We need to start with an important point. Public procurement is regulated by laws such as the UK's Public Contracts Regulations 2015. These rules exist to give effect to international trade deals, like the World Trade Organization Government Procurement Agreement. Parties agree to open up markets for competition in return for the right of businesses to access opportunities worth $1.7 trillion across 48 WTO members. What that means in practice is that we agree to international laws requiring open, fair and transparent competition in government procurement. And that's a fundamental point. Goods and services must be acquired through competition unless there are compelling reasons to the contrary. Some people still refer to procurement rules as EU rules, which is not the case. Procurement rules do and will for the foreseeable future exist in our national legislation because there remain many benefits to trading globally. We often hear people new to the public sector remark that procurement rules make procurement complicated. Sometimes people new to government express bewilderment that we can't just award contracts to a particular firm because they've done a good job before. But we must remember that we are duty-bound to deliver the best value for money for the public purse by balancing quality, results, and cost. We do that through open competition. A fair and consistent procurement process is crucial to maintain a competitive market, and public scrutiny and legal oversight ensure accountability and protect the public interest. There is a new procurement bill passing through Parliament, and this will lead to a new set of procurement regulations probably in early 2024. They aim to simplify public procurement and to make it easier for government and markets to work together. There will be much more to come on that in the next few months, but that's why this training is timely. By understanding how things work now, we'll be in a great place to understand how we can get the most out of the new regime. To understand procurement rules, we need to understand some basic procurement principles: transparency, equal treatment, non-discrimination, and proportionality. I sometimes call these the 10P principles. Transparency means citizens have access to decision-making information. It's about setting out clearly what will happen and then doing that. Equal treatment is about levelling the playing field, providing all providers with fair access to opportunities at all times. This is really about trust. Providers need to know if they tender for opportunities, they will be treated fairly. Non-discrimination means we will not unduly favour particular providers. This usually happens on the grounds of nationality. And proportionality is about using discretion properly, especially when it comes to restricting competition. Whenever we start a procurement exercise, we start with a set of key questions. These questions will guide the extent to which all of those procurement rules apply. Simply, we ask 4 questions. Who is buying? Who are they buying from? What are they buying? And how much is it likely to cost? Let's start with who is buying. In public procurement, we talk about contracting authorities. These are public bodies funded for the most part by public money. This includes DHSC, ALBs, NHS bodies, local government, and for the most part publicly owned limited companies. Contracting authorities are divided into central government authorities and sub-central authorities. DHSC, BSA, NHS England, NHS Trusts, and NHS Foundation Trusts are all central government contracting authorities. The rest of the ALBs are sub-central authorities. We also have central purchasing bodies. They provide purchasing activities on behalf of public organisations. You may have heard of Crown Commercial Services, who have lots of contracts for common goods and services for public bodies to use. Procurement rules apply to all contracting authorities and central purchasing bodies. In terms of who we're buying from, we refer to economic operators, though you could easily call these suppliers, contractors, sellers, providers, or many other things. Essentially, these are organisations that provide goods, works and services on an open market. In terms of what we're buying, we mean goods, services or works. There is a whole list of codes called CPV codes, and most things you would ever want to buy are covered by parent and child codes. So there's a code for musical instruments, then a more detailed code for brass instruments, and then finally a child code for a trombone. These codes not only allow us to determine whether there are any exclusions or special procedures, but also must be included on adverts and notices, so that the subject matter is accessible to all providers, regardless of the language they speak. In terms of how much, the majority of procurement rules apply over certain thresholds. We used to call these OG thresholds, but now we generally refer to them as FTS or Finder Tender Service thresholds. The thresholds are different depending on whether it's a central or sub-central contracting authority and whether it's buying goods, services or works. For a central government body like DHSC buying goods or services, The threshold is currently £138,760. For procurement activities below that threshold, fewer legal rules apply. That doesn't mean no rules apply and we still have to uphold basic principles, so do seek advice if you're unsure. So, by way of recap, procurement rules apply where one or more contracting authorities award a contract for goods, services or works to one or more economic operators above certain thresholds. Once we've established that procurement rules apply, we recommend seeking advice from experienced procurement professionals. They will help advise on the best course of action.
Achieving value for money. Public sector procurement policy requires that goods, services and works must be good value for money and ethically procured in both origin and method. There are 3 broad criteria for determining value for money. Your procurement will be designed around these criteria and each has an envelope in Atomis, our procurement system. The technical envelope will include questions and criteria which are linked to the specification and relate to the quality of the goods or services. The commercial envelope includes criteria relating to price. And the social value envelope includes criteria which mirrors the requirements as set out in the Social Value Act 2012 and are also detailed in the social value model. This is where we can consider and apply relevant themes and criteria to achieve greater value. The themes include recovery from COVID, tackling economic inequality, fighting climate change, promoting equal opportunity, and improving citizens' well-being. Each of the envelopes and criteria will be appropriately weighted in accordance with their relative importance. For example, we may decide to weigh technical at 60%, commercial at 30%, and social value at 10%. There are also a number of policy priorities which will impact procurement activities. These are set out for us in what we call Procurement Policy Notes, or PPNs, published on .gov.uk. We can't cover them all today, but here are a few of the important policies. Sustainable procurement is a process whereby we meet our needs for goods and services in a way that achieves value for money whilst also considering the social, economic and environmental impacts. The social value model is detailed in PPN 0620. Net zero is the government's commitment to decarbonising the UK's economy by 2050. In procurement, this means taking consideration of carbon reduction opportunities when contracting and throughout supply chains. As part of high-value procurements, we ask suppliers to submit a carbon reduction plan, which details how they aim to meet net zero. This is laid out in PPN 0621. The Modern Slavery Act 2015, alongside the guidance published in PPN 0223, requires that we ensure modern slavery risks are identified and managed in government supply chains. Guidance on how to address modern slavery risk is outlined in PPN 0223. So, in summary, we must spend taxpayers' money wisely to deliver goods and services that meet requirements, whilst also addressing society's needs. The commercial function guides the procurement process to achieve these aims, but success can only be achieved through collaboration with all the relevant parties.
Fundamentals of contracting in DHSC. DHSC has a procurement policy available on the intranet. It applies to all staff involved in a procurement process acting on behalf of the department. ALBs and other organisations will have a similar policy. It sets out what you need to do by value. For spend under £1,000, the electronic procurement card or EPC might be suitable, and there's a separate policy on how to use that. Purchases up to £10,000 can be made locally by obtaining one written quote with the budget holder's permission. For purchases up to £25,000, 3 written quotes should be obtained. Purchases between £25,000 and £100,000 will be made using a formal tendering process supported by the Commercial Directorate, and for procurements over £100,000, these will be conducted on your behalf by the Commercial Directorate using our standard ITT documents, and project management principles. It is important to find out what the market can provide, so it's a good idea to conduct market research and engagement to better understand the market potential and limits. A question we're often asked is whether it is okay to talk to suppliers. Generally, the answer is yes, but non-commercial staff must be cautious when engaging with industry to avoid creating a conflict of interest or conferring an unfair advantage on a particular supplier. So it's something we would advise you to seek help with. Commercial professionals can help identify and engage with other stakeholders throughout the procurement process and support with negotiations. If you need to engage the market, it's always wise and helpful to engage with commercial early. With some common goods and services, there's something called a framework. A framework is an existing arrangement that consists of a list of pre-approved suppliers with agreed terms and conditions and legal protections. There are many types of frameworks, and many are divided into lots by product, service, or type. The number of suppliers differs from framework to framework depending on what's being offered. Some frameworks have only one supplier offering complex end-to-end services, while others are designed to be open to thousands of potential bidders. Once awarded, frameworks run for a given time frame, usually a maximum of 4 years. Now, earlier in this knowledge drop, we described central purchasing bodies who procure on behalf of other authorities. I mentioned Crown Commercial Services, and there are many arrangements available to use. Generally, as part of any procurement strategy, we would consider the suitability of any existing framework first. They can help save a lot of time and effort in the selection of suppliers, and they include robust terms and conditions which manage risk for the health family. Even if your needs are higher value or more complex, you may well find a framework agreement that will provide it. Framework agreements vary. Some allow you to award directly if only one suitable supplier is available. Other frameworks might set a maximum price and yet still allow you to run a mini competition, requiring all those on the framework to bid competitively for the business. But if no framework is available, we can procure on the open market. For this, your commercial team will offer advice, including the selection of the most appropriate procurement process.
The contract. A contract is a legally binding agreement between two capable parties who agree on the terms of providing goods, works, or services in return for consideration, which is usually monetary payment. A contract agreement specifies certain legally enforceable rights and obligations. In short, it sets out how a relationship will work. In DHSC, we have standard contract templates. Most of these consist of a form that sets out contract-specific information, such as parties to the contract, description of the services, and goods delivery location. Only certain people in the department can sign contracts on behalf of the Secretary of State. The extent of the authorisation is set out within a letter of contractual delegation. A contract agreement is composed of two components: the Statement of Requirements and Specification, and the contract terms and conditions. The Statement of Requirements is gathered from the business user stakeholders and outlines the business needs and user perspectives. It defines and specifies the expectations and objectives of a project and outlines the requirements that must be met in order to achieve those objectives. The purpose of a Statement of Requirements is to provide a clear and agreed-upon set of requirements that serves as a foundation for the design, development, and delivery of a product, service, or solution. The specification outlines the technical solution to the business requirements and is largely created by the technical team. It includes details such as functional and non-functional requirements, objective measurements, and technical standards. There are further subtypes of specifications based on the type of goods or services being procured. For example, in goods procurement, there may be conformance or input-based specifications, while in services procurement, there may be performance or output-based specifications. A conformance or input-based specification defines a set of criteria that a product, service, or supplier must meet in order to be eligible for the contract. These types of specifications are prescriptive and define in detail the products, materials, and work required. The buyer defines exactly what they want and how they want it. Output-based or performance specifications define only the required outcomes. They don't specify how the outcomes might be achieved. We use key performance indicators, KPIs, to evaluate how well goods or services have been delivered against the specification. The contract terms and conditions make up the main body of the contract document and outline aspects such as pricing, delivery schedules, subcontractors, confidentiality, and communication plans. To assemble a viable, enforceable, and usable contract, we would always recommend using the standard contract forms I mentioned earlier. These forms can be used to save time and resources and contain standard terms that have been proven to work and balance the rights and responsibilities between the buyer and the contractor. These contract forms allow for some customisation, but where bespoke terms are necessary, this must always be carried out in conjunction with the commercial and legal departments. It's worth noting here the top 3 reasons why contracts fail. Number 1, insufficient clarity on the scope and objectives of the agreement, leading to difficulties in effective contract management. Number 2, neglecting to involve the legal and commercial teams early in the process. And number 3, failing to adequately engage stakeholders, resulting in a lack of consensus and shared commitment. As you can see, the roots of many contract failures can be found in the actions and decisions taken in the very early days of the procurement. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of that early work and planning. So, in summary, when engaging with a third party, it's crucial to clearly define your needs with the stakeholders. It's also helpful for fostering a competitive market for the best value for money. To navigate these considerations effectively, it's recommended to seek the guidance and support of your commercial team as early as possible in the procurement process. And remember, contracts can only be signed by those with a letter of contractual delegation.
Process and tools. The procurement process begins with a comprehensive business case, and that outlines the reasons for pursuing the procurement, the potential benefits and risks, and its overall feasibility. The business case evolves through various stages, including the strategic outline case, the outline business case, and the full business case. Throughout these stages, a business case has 5 key components. The strategic case details the policy arguments and benefits. The financial case explains the funding sources and costs. The economic case assesses the benefits and costs to both the authority and wider society. The commercial case outlines the contract delivery options and market opportunities. And the management case covers the resources necessary for successful delivery management. When planning procurement projects, often the approvals can take most time, so plan early. Procurement rules tell us how we must run procurements, which we do through open tendering exercises. They tell us how and where we must advertise opportunities, and where we must publish details of awarded contracts. They contain rules on what we call selection criteria. That's how we ensure the supplier is up to the job. We must exclude suppliers who have been convicted of serious offences, and we can exclude suppliers where they're guilty of professional misconduct or have performed poorly in the past. We can also assess suppliers based on suitability, economic and financial standing, and technical and professional ability. There are also rules on how we assess tenders. We award contracts to the most economically advantageous tenderer, and importantly, that doesn't always mean the lowest cost. In fact, we have wide scope to define the contract award criteria, though we do have to define these and set them out in advance. It's then the job of the evaluation panel to ensure that the best tender is selected. A simple way of explaining these criteria is that selection criteria assess the supplier themselves and are therefore backwards looking. Award criteria relate to confidence in how the contract will perform and are therefore forwards-looking. The evaluation of tenders is a crucial step in the procurement process. To ensure a fair and just award of the contract, we must base our decision on a clear and transparent evaluation process. This involves scoring the submitted tenders against well-defined evaluation criteria, set out in an evaluation strategy with weightings and scoring methods. Let's talk about the various different procurement procedures. There are 5, and the procurement team will advise you on the most appropriate one to use. The open procedure is the default procedure, and this is the most commonly used. This means any interested bidder may submit a tender and all the submissions must be evaluated. It's a single-stage process, and selection and award criteria are assessed together. Generally, a tender must be open for a minimum of 30 days. The restricted procedure allows you to pre-qualify suppliers and then to evaluate a smaller number of bids. This might be appropriate where there are many suppliers and a large number of bids is to be expected. It's a 2-stage process where selection criteria are evaluated and then 5 or more suppliers are invited to submit a tender. It takes a little bit longer as both the selection stage and the tender stage are generally open for 30 days. Negotiation is not permitted with the open or restricted procedures. The 3 other procedures where negotiation is allowed are called the competitive procedure with negotiation, the competitive dialogue, and the innovation partnership. These are suitable when it's not easy to define requirements, where there is complexity or innovation, and where there may be different ways of meeting our needs. Be warned though, these procedures are resource-intensive, they take longer, and the stakes are higher as they require significant investment from both the authority and suppliers. Urgent procurement. It is a fact of life that sometimes things need to be procured urgently. Procuring without competition is generally not allowed. The circumstances where it is permitted are very limited indeed. If you do need to procure urgently, we would still consider options like framework agreements or varying existing contracts. And there are some circumstances where we can reduce timescales using something called the accelerated procedure. You may have heard of the direct award or single tender action procedure. In legal lingo, it's called the negotiated procedure without prior publication, and it's covered by Regulation 32 of the Public Contracts Regulations. It's a truly exceptional procedure and it requires robust justifications with additional approvals. Remember, goods and services must be acquired by competition unless there are compelling reasons to the contrary. Those rules are strictly interpreted by the courts, and there is a high risk of legal challenge. And, finally, all actions and decisions taken during the procurement process must be recorded with proper justification, as they may be subject to legal scrutiny in the event of a challenge.
Let's turn to look at the stages of the procurement process. Whichever procedure is used, procurement activity works in a cycle. There are 5 main stages in all procurement processes: defining business need, developing procurement strategy, selecting suppliers, inviting and evaluating tenders, and contract management. Amy has described in detail the business need and how that's defined within the specification. Our procurement strategy is carefully crafted based on the current market conditions and the unique requirements of the project. We strive for stakeholder consensus and buy-in. In some cases, external stakeholders may be consulted. For example, where there is high cost, controversial and innovative requirements, His Majesty's Treasury or the Cabinet Office may be engaged. As mentioned, the contract value and set thresholds dictate the manner in which we engage with the market. It's crucial that all communication and information exchange with potential suppliers are accurately recorded, as this can be subject to scrutiny and challenge. When publishing the contract notice on Contracts Finder or Finder Tender Service, all necessary information must be included, such as the contract term length and worth. The procurement process must be clearly stated, and invitations to tender must include all relevant documentation, such as the contract terms, conditions, specifications, and performance expectations. During the selection phase, we use the previously outlined selection questionnaire to determine the eligibility of potential suppliers. Any exclusions or inclusions must be justified and recorded. The evaluation and award process must be designed and published as part of the invitation to tender. This is where we'll detail to suppliers the clear definition of criteria and method for weighing, scoring, and determining meet, or the most economically advantageous tender. After the tendering exercise, it's important to debrief unsuccessful tenderers to provide feedback and encourage improvement for future bids. Finally, a contract is awarded to the successful bidder. There may be a period for implementation and transition, and then business as usual contract management activities should be established for the duration of the contract. It's not possible to go into detail on all the things that must be considered throughout a procurement process, but I am going to mention 3 crucially important elements. Each of the following points should be considered at every single stage of every single procurement. Transparency. Transparency is a key principle that permeates the entire procurement process, from advertising the requirement to finalising the award. The advertising channels, such as Finder Tender Service or Contracts Finder, are selected based on the procurement thresholds and are set in regulations. We must comply with these regulations, keep a detailed record of all decisions and engagements to defend against any potential legal challenges. Throughout all procurement dealings, it's crucial to follow through on promises and clearly communicate actions taken. We say clearly what we're going to do, we do what we said we were going to do, and then we tell them what we said we were going to do. Conflicts of interest. We must ensure independence and non-conflicts of interest. Mechanisms such as declaration forms and separation of duties between procurement team members can be used to reduce the risk. If conflicts arise and cannot be remedied, a potential bidder or member of the procurement team may have to be excluded from the procurement process. Record keeping. This cannot be stressed enough. All reasoning and decisions must be fully recorded, and all necessary levels of approval and commercial input gained at the outset of the procurement and throughout.
So we're now approaching the end of this procurement knowledge drop. We've explained a bit about the role of the commercial function, outlined key legislation for public sector procurement, provided an overview of value for money, the fundamentals of contracting in DHSC, contract types, and set out a typical process. Thank you for your time today, and I hope you've enjoyed our knowledge drop. Don't worry if it all sounds complicated. The Commercial Directorate is ready to help and advise at all stages of the process. Good luck, and we look forward to working with you soon.